Stop chasing a dream job that doesn't exist yet. Most people fail because they start at the beginning, but the secret to career mastery is actually starting at the end. Imagine it is a Tuesday afternoon 10 years from today. What are you actually doing? Let's reverse engineer that exact moment. Every career coach on the internet will tell you to figure out your dream job by asking what you want to be when you grow up, as if you're still 6 years old and the options are astronaut, doctor, or YouTuber, which is a little ironic because most adults who actually try to answer that question just freeze, panic, and end up picking whatever job title sounds impressive enough to put on a dating app bio. In reality, planning a career has almost nothing to do with picking a job title and almost everything to do with reverse engineering a random Tuesday afternoon 10 years from now, which is a fancy way of saying stop starting at the beginning and start at the end. So let's get the obvious disclaimer out of the way. I'm not a career coach, I'm not a therapist, and I definitely haven't figured out my own 10-year plan with total precision. Mostly because 10 years ago, I thought I'd be doing something completely different than this. But I do have a theory and it can be explained by a chart. Picture two paths. One path starts with a job title, works backward from there, and hopes the day-to-day details sort themselves out later. The other path starts with an actual Tuesday afternoon, a specific moment, a specific desk, a specific set of tasks, and works backward from that moment to figure out what job title even gets you there. Most career advice only ever draws the first path. Nobody draws the second one, because the second one requires you to actually sit still and imagine something specific instead of just Googling high-paying jobs 2036. Tip number 1. Stop asking what you want to be and start asking what a random Tuesday looks like. This sounds like a small reframe, but it changes everything about how the goal actually functions in your brain. I want to be a lawyer is a label, and labels are surprisingly easy to chase without ever checking whether the actual daily experience underneath the label is something you'd enjoy. I want to be sitting at a specific desk at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, reviewing a contract. Occasionally getting interrupted by a call from a client I actually like is not a label. It's a scene, and scenes are much harder to fake yourself into wanting. A label lets your brain quietly skip past the boring, repetitive, occasionally annoying middle of a normal workday and jump straight to the highlight reel version of the job. The parts you'd actually show in a movie trailer. A scene doesn't let you do that, because a scene forces you to sit in the unglamorous middle, which is where you actually spend most of your 10,000 working days. Tip number 2, and this is the part people skip because it feels almost too simple to matter. Get specific about the sensory details, not just the job function. Most people, when they imagine their future career, imagine a vague montage, a nice office, a laptop, some vague sense of success. That's not specific enough to reverse engineer anything. Is the desk in a shared open office or a private room? Is it loud or silent? Are you standing most of the day or sitting? Is the lighting from a window or a fluorescent ceiling panel? These details feel irrelevant until you realize that plenty of people chase a job title and then discover the actual physical experience of the role, the noise level, the constant meetings. The lack of natural light makes them miserable within 6 months, regardless of how prestigious the title sounded on paper. The sensory layer is also the fastest way to test a vision against reality, because you can usually go find a room like the one you're imagining right now, today, and just sit in it for 20 minutes to see how your body actually reacts, instead of waiting a decade to find out you hate fluorescent lighting. Tip number 3. Define the complexity level of your tasks, because this is usually where people get the biggest surprise. There's a huge difference between a job where you solve one hard, deep problem for 4 uninterrupted hours and a job where you solve 50 small problems in 50 different 5-minute bursts. Both can technically fall under the same job title. A software engineer role at one company might mean deep, quiet, focused architecture work. A software engineer role at another company might mean constant Slack pings, 15-minute stand-ups, and firefighting production bugs all day. If you don't specify which version of that Tuesday you're imagining, you might chase the title and land in the exact opposite complexity structure from the one that would have actually made you happy. Some people thrive on constant context switching and would find 4 uninterrupted hours on one problem unbearably boring. Other people need long blocks of uninterrupted focus and find constant interruptions genuinely distressing. Neither preference is better, but almost nobody figures out which one they are until they're already several years into a job that fights against their natural rhythm. Tip number 4. Picture the actual people in the room, not just the job function they represent. Most career fantasies include vague background characters, a boss, some coworkers, maybe a client, but the specific dynamic of those relationships matters enormously. Are you managing a team of 10 people who report to you? Or are you the only person in the room for most of the day? Are you collaborating constantly with people your own age, or mostly interacting with people 20 years older than you in a hierarchy you have to navigate carefully? A lot of career dissatisfaction doesn't actually come from the tasks themselves. It comes from the social structure surrounding the tasks, which almost nobody thinks to reverse engineer in advance. Tip number 5. Picture the actual pace and pressure of the day, not just the tasks themselves. A job can have identical tasks and an identical title and still feel completely different depending on whether the deadline is next month or next hour. Some people picture their future career as calm and unhurried, then chase a title that's actually notorious for constant urgent deadlines because the urgency never showed up in the fantasy version. If your ideal Tuesday involves a slow, methodical pace with room to think, that's a completely different set of industries and roles than a Tuesday built around adrenaline, tight deadlines, and constant fire drills. Neither pace is inherently better, but pretending pace doesn't matter is one of the most common ways people end up in a technically successful job that quietly exhausts them. Tip number 6. Once you have the scene, work backward through the actual chain of moves that get you there, not just the final title. This is where most people quit the exercise early, because working backward from a vivid 10-year scene into this year's actual next step feels like a lot of unglamorous middle steps. But the whole point of starting at the end is that it exposes exactly which of those middle steps actually matter and which ones are just generic advice you can skip. If your Tuesday scene involves running a small team and mostly doing strategy work instead of hands-on execution, that tells you something very specific about whether you need 5 more years of individual contributor experience first or whether you should be angling toward management much sooner than the standard career advice would suggest. Tip number 7. Expect the scene to change. And don't treat that as failure. A lot of people build one detailed 10-year vision, treat it as sacred, and then feel like they've failed when it shifts 2 years later. But the entire value of the exercise isn't that you locked in the one true correct Tuesday forever. It's that you built the muscle of imagining specifically, instead of vaguely. The version of you in 3 years will have more information than you have right now. And a good reverse-engineered plan should update. The same way you'd replan a road trip after checking traffic. Not abandon the destination entirely just because the first route hit construction. In fact, if your scene hasn't changed at all after a couple years of new experience and information, that's more likely a sign you haven't actually been paying attention than a sign you nailed it perfectly on the first try. Tip number 8. Revisit the scene on a schedule, not just whenever you happen to feel lost. Most people only reconsider their career direction during a crisis. A layoff, a burnout spiral, a bad performance review, which means every update to the plan happens under stress, at the worst possible time to think clearly. A better approach is to revisit the scene deliberately, maybe once a year, when nothing is on fire, specifically because calm updates tend to be more honest than panicked ones. You're far more likely to admit the scene has quietly stopped fitting you when you're not also trying to survive a bad week at work. Tip number 9, and the last one, don't wait for total clarity before you start moving, because clarity mostly comes from motion, not from more imagining. You don't need the scene to be perfect, you need it specific enough to point you toward a next step you can actually take this month. Whether that's a conversation, a course, a project, or just switching which parts of your current job you spend the most energy on. People who wait for the full picture to resolve before acting usually end up stuck in the planning stage indefinitely, which is its own quiet way of avoiding the discomfort of actually trying something and finding out it's wrong. If you put all of this together, planning a career isn't a title-picking exercise, it's a scene-building exercise. You skip the vague job label and go straight to a specific Tuesday. You fill in the sensory details, the task complexity, the pace, and the people in the room. You work backward from that scene instead of forward from a title. You expect the scene to update as you learn more and revisit it on purpose instead of only during a crisis. And you start moving before everything feels resolved. None of this requires you to already know exactly what you want. It just requires you to imagine specifically enough that the vague fog of what do I want to be turns into something you can actually reverse engineer. Anyway, if that helped, I'm collecting donations in the form of subscribes to fund the next video.